Hi, my name is Dorian, otherwise known as Mr. Mojo, the founder of KetoMojo, and I am honored today to be moderator of this panel. I don't think there even needs to be much moderating with such a high level of luminaries. I'm not too sure whether should we do a little brief introduction of yourself? That would be absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go to my first beautiful friend, Dr. Nasha Winters. We've known each other for many, many years. And so I'm so happy to be moderating with you today.
Yay, thank you. Great to see all these great faces among us as well. So thanks everyone for sharing in this.
Wade. Okay, you got us there.
Hey everybody, great to meet you all. So it's I'm Wade T. Lightheart, co-founder of BiOptimizers. We're a company that focuses on human optimization, starting with the digestive health and then moving on to the other systems of the body.
Cool. Dasha, last time we saw each other was what, in London?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Yeah,
I think
cool.
most of you guys have seen it all in London. Hi, everyone. I'm now actually in San Francisco, so Pacific Coast, but saying hi to you all. Excited for this.
Yeah. Frank
Jaksch. I'm the founder and executive chairman of ChromaDex. ChromaDex is the company that found this compound called nicotinamide riboside that is our product, True Niagen, and it started this whole sort of cascade around this topic of NAD, and I think we'll probably be spending some time talking about that today. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for the introduction, guys. Well, let's just jump into it. You know, it was interesting listening to the when Julia introduced the different products here, and they said science-backed. Well, how do you separate the pseudoscience from what you think is the real science? Where is your go-to area to say, like, hey, here's a good authority, and this is why I choose that? And let's take a look at this in two sections. One, those people are just buying, optimizing themselves for wellness, and then perhaps those people are trying to do it for an illness that they're trying to get over. So let's start off with you, Wade, just to kind of like get your bit, and then we're going to go around briefly to each one of you to keep it nice and short, like 1 to 2 minutes, so that we can move through a lot of the questions that came in.
Well, I think first and foremost, a person has to be able to understand there's a pretty big range in individual variance between people. And if you're truly a biohacker, you're probably going to need some expertise to be able to do some maybe genetics, epigenetics, some GI maps, some things like that to get some specifics, because even if you take a product that might be proven scientifically, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the right product for you. So a little bit of testing in the front end will allow you to specifically target what's going to happen. The downside of, just pure sciences is, as biohackers or biooptimizers, what do you want to call ourselves, we're often taking a bunch of different products in contingency and hoping for the results. So sometimes we take a little bit of a shotgun approach on things, and that's where that expertise will come in. As far as science, so it is nice we're kind of on the cutting edge where we're getting more scientific testing. Like, we have our own research team. Sorry, I just got something in my throat, but we have our own PhDs that are, looking at our biofilm, seeing the interactions of our products and things like that. So most of the best companies have some in-house labs or some sort of team of expertise that's doing their testing independently so that they can formulate and develop their products. And that's kind of where the best companies are going. Of course, you're going to pay a premium price for it, but usually the science is catching up to what people are, testing individually with their expert.
Great. Now, Dasha, you've seen a lot of different companies and go there. So from your perspective of looking across a broad spectrum, where do you go to find your trusted sources, and what do you look at to build out that science?
Yeah. So for me, it goes back to that intuition to some extent of checking in with yourself. I think first, it's within women's health specifically, because that's where I'm focused. There isn't that much science out there, unfortunately. A lot of the things we haven't yet researched. There was the first HRV study for women specifically was last year. So it is challenging. So to me, it's look to people like Nasha. Look to people who are in my trusted circle, right? And ask them the questions, follow them, figure out what they're recommending, but then check in on myself and check in to see, okay, is this actually fitting with me or not? Oftentimes I find that people follow influencers or follow things and don't necessarily check in with themselves. And I think that's also where we're seeing things progress within this biohacking movement of read the articles, understand what people think to be the case within science, but also be aware that it is reductionist, unfortunately, and our bodies are not that way. So take it with a grain of salt and check in with yourself before you just willy-nilly go ahead and take all of these supplements or take all of these recommendations from people who are not living within your own body.
Mm-hmm. Great. Doc, where you go? You're on mute.
Here we go. Great with cancer, terrible with technology. So that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on, like, because you're in both worlds. You're obviously really entrenched in the medical world with oncology, but obviously you also then straddle into the biohacking world. So where do you go for your trusted sources for science?
Well, first of all, I want to really second what Wade said, because I'm such a proponent of testing and not guessing. And so if someone tells me something works, I want to see the data. I want to see the metrics. I want to see how it goes back and forth. Just like Dasha said, like, try it on myself and see how it feels, but recognize that my experience will be very different than somebody else's. So I too take it with a grain of salt. I definitely reach for testing and metrics to show me the data. And I'm also very much about the N=1 experiment, in that our medical system and our scientific system today is based on this sort of mass, statistic deviation. And yet most of us will be outliers on either end of that spectrum. And so just saying you fall in the middle, like labs are a really good example. Labs today are based on the average of the population, and we are not a healthy population. So you do not want to be in that bell-shaped curve, right? So those are just some examples. And then also I heard a few, both Wade and Dasha suggest that it's important to have vetted internal research and accountability, but also look to third-party testing and have really smart, much smarter people than yourself on your team to be looking at the data critically and from a third-party, non-invested perspective.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Frank, you also had your start in the cancer world, didn't you, if I believe, correct?
Well, my background is like early stage drug discovery. I'm a chemist, biochemist by background, but which is what led to the founding ChromaDex. But it's your question about good versus bad science has been sort of very relevant to the ChromaDex story over the past 20 years, because that's what our reputation is really as a science-based, chemistry-based company. And we've spent an unbelievable amount of money just developing this one thing, nicotinamide riboside. There's hundreds of peer-reviewed published studies. So, I mean, and having done this as long as I've been doing it, the good versus the bad is really in the quality of the published science. I mean, if it's not published, it doesn't exist. I mean, a lot of companies don't publish their studies, which is sort of mystifying to me on why they don't do that. And there's also this problem with borrowed science. So just because there's published science on something doesn't mean that that science actually traces to your product. And, consumers, physicians, anybody that's involved in the market, you really need to do your homework, because just because somebody has something that they're purporting is based on peer-reviewed science, it doesn't necessarily mean that that product really is based on that. Our peer-reviewed published studies, preclinical or clinical studies for that matter, are on our product. Those are studies that are performed on our product, not somebody else's product. And there's a lot that goes into even just the chemistry of understanding what a company is introducing to commerce. What are you putting into the product? How did it get there? What are the potential problems or impurities with it? And all those things are relevant to, again, I think that there's an abuse of relying on even publicly available peer-reviewed published science.
Fantastic. So I think that's a lovely kind of like segue. Okay, we've got the science that is out there. We're taking a look at it. I'm hearing bio-individuality from you people in that. I'm hearing test, don't guess. So you've got the data. I'm hearing like to find a trusted source, somebody who's not invested in it as a coach. So here you are, you're looking to have the most long life possible. There's lifespan and health span. So looking at those, what would be your like maybe top 3 takeaways to maximizing that that health span?
Do you want to start with me or?
Yeah, why not, Frank? Let's go to you, seeing us like that, and then we'll whip around the other way. We'll come back the other side. I'll loop round.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, on lifespan and health span are 2 completely different concepts. I mean, lifespan is essentially just chronological age, and health span, if you really want to look at it, is biological age. And there are studies out there now that are starting to show that just there could be a separation between your biological age and your chronological age. And I think there's going to be 2 major components to understanding biological age versus chronological age. No one's going to be able to, unless somebody invents a time machine, no one's going to be able to impact chronological age. It's really going to be more of a focus on this biological age. And there are going to be 2 components to that. One is going to be the ability to, an accurate measure of biomarkers for assessing biological age. So we need to be able to test people to show them what's wrong. And then the second thing, and then coupled with that are going to be, well, how do you address those? Now that we've tested for it, how do you fix the problems that are associated with, the wheels falling off on certain biological markers? How do you impact those? How do you change? How do you modulate them?
Great. Nasha, we're going to go to you on the health span, lifespan question.
Sure. Now, someone who works pretty exclusively now with patients dealing with cancer diagnosis, they are definitely facing that question on a daily basis. Their doctors often are focusing on progressive-free survival. They're focusing on adding a few more days or weeks or even months to their lifespan, but no one's really addressing that quality of life component. So I agree with Frank about the biological and the chronological, but also the quality of such is very, very important. And so one of the things that really strikes me today when we think about this is why longevity in this country is dropping for the past 3 years in a row. And that isn't really coming down to our biomarkers specifically, as I would have expected. Interestingly enough, it's coming down to a level of despair. And, I presented on this at Ancestral Health this year, that the drivers of the loss of longevity in this country are based on pain, be it emotional or physical pain, which has led us to the opiate overdose and a suicide crisis. And yes, I suspect there are biometric markers underneath all of that as well, a lot of drivers that put people in that situation. But I think that that's also where in the biohacking, we kind of get focused on the biochemistry and the mitochondrial hacking, but we need to take that up to the esoteric, spiritual, emotional as well.
Mm-hmm. Dasha, in your world of women's health, what are the challenges that you are seeing in increasing that health span and that for a woman's perspective?
Yeah, so I think one, just to echo what Nasha was saying, I fully agree with that from the standpoint of where are we going in terms of longevity? Where and what is that quality of life? From a woman's perspective, yes, we're seeing a lot of advances in the sense of pushing out potentially menopause, pushing out the ability to have children later on in life. The latest woman or the oldest woman to have a child was 70 years old. So we're pushing that out. Now the question is that actually what we want to be doing? Is that really going to be helping us in the future? Is that something that we want from a longevity standpoint? Because there are already reverberating effects going on after that. Are you going to be able to be a good mother for your children? Are you going to be able to be there as they grow older? So from a women's perspective, I think we are starting to push that further. My question and my caveat though is, again, longevity just in terms of a number of, okay, we can live to 120, 140, 180, keep pushing it. But what does that actually look like in terms of quality and in terms of happiness? And I think there's that aspect that from a biohacker's perspective, yes, we're pushing it. We're including technology where we're trying to make sure that we can live that long life. My question would just be, even if we're not able to live until 120, what about if we make sure that the life that we are living is really quality, is juicy, right? Is that going back to Ayurveda, going back to that, like the older school of thought, it's let's live all the way until 80, and then at 80 die in our sleep and just pass on, rather than having to take a lot of external things to just stay alive. So I'll just leave it with that.
Yeah, the long goodbye is always a challenge, I think. When you look at people with diabetes, and once you get a diabetes diagnosis, you could be, 10, 15 years less lifespan. But what is that back long goodbye after you've had an amputation or after you've been on dialysis or something like that? And that's a burden totally to society. Wade, what is your take here on that?
Sure. Well, I see these as two competing deltas. If you imagine your health span starts to kind of rise up on a kind of a bell curve, and then your lifespan, and you could slow that curve or increase the peak depending on what you do in a lifestyle. And most people are attracted into biohacking usually because of some compromisation. So that compromisation may actually be a gift in whatever challenge that you might be facing. So you have to face that into the total context of where a person is and what can you do right now at this moment. And then if you're a parent, obviously you can change a lot of that XY axis right off the bat by implementing those practices and principles that would allow full development of the capacity of the human organism. But I would think if we look at health span, some practical applications, the first thing is eat less. The second thing is move more. And the third thing is to make sure that you have the ability for your detoxification pathways, because aging, for the most part, is just the cells get so condensed and filled up with undigested proteins and stuff, they start to not operate properly, and that leads to the degeneration and stuff. So what is before you take a supplement or things like that is, I always say the non-negotiables are air, water, and exercise. So the highest quality air that you're breathing, along with the deep breathing practice, so that you can mitigate the subconscious and conscious aspects of life, that you can not be in an over-stress situation, like kind of blow out the Seeley response. The second thing is, are you really, water is one of the biggest detoxification pathways next to decarbonation of the blood. Are you drinking tap water? Are you drinking plastic water? Are you drinking waters that really are not really what water is supposed to be to hydrate and flush your body? And then second thing is, the unintended consequences of a technological revolution has happened, that we have to focus as a population on exercise. And as we all age, particularly resistance exercise that keeps the muscle mass, because up until 100 years ago, exercise wasn't an issue. That was called living. But now, because of the technological innovations of society, we actually have to subvert our natural tendency to preserve energy as a species. And so we're in the realm of a technological evolution that has influenced our biology, our sociology, and our lifestyle practices. And if you don't make those changes immediately, your health span and your lifestyle span will probably be interrupted.
Wade, you touched on a subject there which I want to expand on a little bit when you were talking about the externalities that can affect the body. And Nasha, I always loved the image you showed at one talk about the bucket, the mitochondrial bucket, and all the different things that can actually affect that. That's kind of like things is like, what would you change in that terrain around you in that respect? And let's touch a little bit of what people can do to really upregulate some of their epigenetics.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry, that was for Wade or for me? I'm sorry about that.
That was for you, Doc.
Oh, okay. We could probably banter on this because I think Wade and I are in agreement from previous conversations. So I'll allude to it and he can jump in as well. But, we're just that bucket that you talk about, it accumulates things over time, even stuff before we are birthed into this world, from what our parents were exposed to and even their parents were exposed to. That's in their parents and upstream several generations are impacting our epigenetic expression. what we put in as fuel, either too much, too little, or the timing of it and the source of it and the quality of it, that affects our metabolic machinery and the way our engine runs. The environmental toxins that we are all exposed to today, right? It is no longer a matter of, do I have toxicity? It's how much, how bad is it, and how does it interface with my personal epigenetic blueprint? And then we look at the microbiome. Thank God we're surrounded by people who are experts in this area as well, which seems to really be a conductor of this, which the Ayurvedic doctors, the Chinese medicine doctors, the naturopaths, we've been sort of poop and GI obsessed since the beginning. And it seems to be paying off now with a lot of our research in that arena with regards to our emotional health, our immune health, which then, of course, our immune system, key. We're dealing with some major crises today. And really that's because our immune systems are off track in a big, big way. Thanks to some of these things filling up our bucket. And then it moves into things like inflammation, circulation, which Wade alluded to with the need to move your body more, and that sort of stagnation when Americans are spending less than 15 minutes outdoors and rarely exercise, and 70% of us are dealing with obesity. Those are some issues that are really starting to stagnate that pool, if you will. And then looking at your hormonal balance, your circadian rhythm and stress response, and finally that mental, emotional, spiritual piece. Those are sort of the 10 major findings I have found in my near 3-decade career that are impacting the health and vitality of what goes into that bucket. And I think what's so amazing about this group is we are all expert in helping look inside that bucket and clean it out, put in what needs to be in and take out what needs to get out of there.
So, Frank, how would you be managing these externalities? What would be your go-to pieces in that of those different pieces to go to get a better outcome?
Well, I mean, Wade sort of touched on it, is that, look, I mean, if you really look at where the definitions of aging are going all the way around, it really is focused on cells or cellular health. So, I mean, the definition of aging itself is moved essentially to molecular or cellular damage. And there's more data that's been publishing over the past 10 years on that topic. One of those that basically is started to look at that. And if you look at where the aging research is going, it's all focused on stuff that will impact cellular health in some way. And that goes to the publication that started, that was this 9 hallmarks of aging. And all of the 9 hallmarks of aging are essentially cellular markers of what's going wrong within the aging cell. So our focus has been on that for the past 10 or 15 years now. And we're focused on one particular aspect of that, which is NAD, which has really started to skyrocket in terms of its awareness and importance. And just to make sure I'm clear on that, is that it's not some sort of crazy miracle cure. Really, what we're doing is we're impacting one very important mechanism that's a part of that cellular process. NAD has through published science over the past 10 or 15 years, has proven to be incredibly important to a range of different cellular processes. NAD is necessary for production of ATP. We've known that forever. It's necessary for glucose metabolism. But what wasn't as well known was that NAD is also necessary from an energy supply standpoint to fuel all these repair mechanisms that are going on within the cell. And essentially what happens over time is, as you age, your cells become dysfunctional and NAD metabolism gets interrupted. It becomes less efficient. You produce less NAD. And interesting enough, at a time when you have an increase of repair, so NAD, it's a simple supply and demand economics curve. You have less NAD at a time when your cells need more NAD, and that deficit is basically a problem. And that's kind of the core of what we've been focusing on as it relates to that story. And the interesting point on that from the 9 hallmarks of aging is that NAD plays a role. There's peer-reviewed published science now linking NAD as a crucial factor in all the 9 hallmarks of aging. Does that mean that it's going to be the miracle cure for all 9 hallmarks? No, not at all. I'm not trying to say that. It's just that it plays a role in those 9 hallmarks. And anyway, that's what we're excited about, is the fact that there's just so much publishing on this right now. It's an interesting area, and we love seeing it go to cellular health right now.
So we heard 9 hallmarks, 9 targeted things there, 10 from Dr. Nasha. Dasha, in a woman's realm, what do you think are the targeted areas that you would say, all right, you've got to draw up your list, but what are the ones that a woman should be focusing in on and saying, hey, this is what we need to be looking at very clearly within your world?
Hormone health, hormone balancing, and stress would be the two, I would say. And why is that? Oftentimes now what we're seeing, especially in our community, so we've created this women's biohacking community. We're calling it the women's health community, to expand a little bit outside of just the biohacking realm. But what we're seeing there is that's one of the biggest questions, right? How do I balance my hormones? Because I have PMS, I'm not sleeping well, I'm losing hair, I have night terrors. Lots of these things end up being because your hormones are not balanced. And comparing men versus women appear to be a little bit more fickle, a little bit more Goldilocks about our hormones throughout the month, throughout our lives. And therefore, many of these things, the external forces that Nasha was talking about, actually impact those hormones. So talking about skin health, talking about the things that we're putting onto our skin, the biggest organ in our bodies, it's the makeup, it's the creams, it's things like that, which oftentimes we don't think about. Oftentimes we lay that kind of away and just say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But in truth, we're absorbing all of that, and that's impacting our hormones. Secondly, I would say it's sleep. A lot of women right now, especially given what we're all going through, we're so stressed out, we can't sleep. Where we feel like we're taking on all this extra weight, be it that we're trying to care for folks at home as well as have a job, be it that we're just always trying to be the caretakers, and therefore sleep suffers. If sleep suffers, it's just a cascade down. When I'm thinking about in terms of kind of like a pyramid of priorities of what to focus on first, I often tell people, focus on the biggest problem that you're facing, right? In my case, it was brain health, and I needed to fix my cognitive capabilities, and then I could focus on the rest of the biohacking world. But so oftentimes, if it's not an acute thing that somebody is working on, gut health or again, brain health, things like that, I often will tell people, fix your sleep. If you fix your sleep, everything else can start getting a little bit better. But if you try and fix your hormones before fixing your sleep, it's just, or throw an NAD when you're not sleeping, or BiOptimizers, incredible, fantastic products that are going to tremendously change your world. But if you're not sleeping well, it may be a little bit more difficult to have that push and that change.
Yeah. Wade, as a bodybuilder, an athlete, what are the kind of like the in the terrain in your world are the core things that you kind of like dial on into to say, hey, this is the thing I must focus in on to get the best outcome for myself?
Well, it's going to be an answer that you might not expect, and that is creativity, connections, curiosity. These are the hallmarks of people who live a rich life as they get into their older years. Are you maintaining your curiosity about the world, trying new things? Do you have the connections with your family, your friends, your social group? I grew up in a very small town where for example, on my street alone, there is 7 houses. Of those 7 houses, 3 of the people live to be over 100 years old. One of the ladies is still living today. She's 102 and still throws her own wood in the house and makes jams and pies and has nothing to do with biohacking. But she's deeply involved physically, and she's deeply connected to her community, her family, and has a curiosity and a value of life. And that's something that was when you see older people taken away from their gardens, taken away from their families, taken away from their groups, that's when you see a rapid degeneration of the health and vitality of the person. Also in rural areas, oftentimes people, of course, are doing physical activity. And if you look at one of the other earmarks that people stay home is they stay within their routines and their physical activity levels, whatever it's gardening or lawn bowling or something. But particularly if it's done with some sort of social connection. So the neighbors in my neighborhood, the old ladies would be talking back and forth about what's happening with their beans or if their cucumbers aren't going. So there was something, and they would come over and see each other's gardens. There was a curiosity and a connection that they still felt as a contribution to life. And then the final piece to that is consciousness. And what is your grand picture of your life, and how does it fit into your life, and how do you see your relation to living and to dying? Because so many people live their life as if they're not going to die. And the reality is, through contemplation of one's death as early as possible, then you're more likely to live a richer life in the first place. And that's not necessarily how long I live. It's how do I live as long as I'm here? And I think so many people wait to have that a question. And I've been on the deathbed of many people from young age to older ages, and it's not the things that people do that they regret. It's the things that they didn't.
Great. I love that one. Thank you. That was a nice little ending segue right there. So now I'm gonna pivot completely the other way, and I'm gonna give you $1 gazillion, all of you, but you don't have to spend it all at once, and you can be frugal if you want. What would you say is the one gadget? Because biohackers love their gadgets. I mean, one gadget or one thing, it could be an H-bot, it could be a sleep pod, it could be whatever. What would you say, okay, my one thing of what I would think that, hey, this is what I really, really like. You can even have it if you have. Give us your gadget, and I'm going to actually start over with Dasha, because you've actually been in the full gadget world at some of the conferences that we've been. So you've seen the plethora there. So you have a big choice to go on to. I
do. And how much money do I have?
$1 gazillion.
Okay.
I've given you a big budget.
Big budget. All right. I would go buy an island, and that would be my gadget. Honestly,
great one.
Sorry, it's true though. It's I think biohacking is incredible. We have incredible gadgets, but think about what the gadgets are for. They're to get us back to nature. Why do we have red light? Why do we have blue blocking glasses? Why do we have cryo chambers? Because back in the day, we were doing all that outside. We were grounding. We weren't wearing as many clothes. We were going to bed early. We were waking up early. We had a fireplace, or a fire, right? And that red light was there. It was all natural. So to me, if I had $1 gazillion, I would go and just buy an island somewhere close to the equator. And then I'm getting my vitamin D. I'm getting the sunlight. I'm getting grounding. I'm swimming in the ocean. I'm getting, everything all together. It's that's where I would go. And again, in terms of if I'm actually playing the game properly, I suppose, it would just really depend on what you're trying to solve for. It goes back to that previous question. I mean, my gadget is going to be very different than any of these speakers and anybody else. So to me, lately in this pandemic, I've been really conscious about my mindset. And I live in a biohacking house. We literally have many of the gadgets here. And to me, it's how do I reduce my stress levels? How do I just calm myself down? Because the world out there is just crazy right now. So I've been playing around a lot with the Apollo and NuCalm, NuCalm. Those two have just been really helping me kind of down-regulate my stress because while I might think that I'm not stressed out, my Oura ring is showing me something very different, right? So I would just say, for me right now, it's been lowering stress.
Cool. So we're going to form a collective. All the biohackers are going to get together, and we're going to buy an island. I'm with you 100% on that one there.
Done.
Nasha, going to join us on the island, but what piece of equipment would you bring with you? What would be your go-to?
So first of all, I wouldn't buy the equipment. I would just enjoy the sunshine and nature as per se, because that is actually my biggest recharger always, is the sun for me and just being outdoors. But what I would like to do is to put that money into creating a place where people can come and experience what it is like to be back in balance with nature, to be able to learn again, to remember again what we all came here to do. And that is what we're actually actively fundraising for right now, is for a hospital, a metabolic forward-thinking integrative residential hospital research institute on hundreds of acres of land, where we get to help people see what it's truly like to live health optimally. And we do so by using all of the amazing tools, all the things that have been talked about today, to really test, assess, and address where people's health currently is at that moment, and what it's going to take them back to the place that they were meant to be.
Wow, fantastic. I love the fact that, like we could think it was $1 gazillion, but realize that to actually go out to just into nature is completely free. We can all walk out in that way. Frank, I'm amazed I gave you guys $1 gazillion and you haven't spent much. I'm still holding it to myself. I might get my own private island. Frank, what is your take on this one?
Well, you invited a biochemist, so you're going to get a biochemist answer. So for me, it would be really more towards the biomarkers, aging related biomarkers. And, if I had $1 gazillion, I would invest in easy ways for people to real time measure what's going on within their body, within their cells. And number one, you'd have to identify the biomarkers that you wanted to track. And then two, you need to design the technology that would be able to measure those in real time, like an Apple Watch, if you will. This whole concept of liquid biopsy, especially now, there's a lot going on cancer when it comes to liquid biopsy, and the idea of being able to measure things or identify things earlier through diagnostic. And I think the same thing with aging.
That sounds to me like the ultimate wearable tricorder that you could get all the data set, but it would serve it up in a way that it gives you the 9 or 10 things to focus into. Wade, you've still got your budget of $1 gazillion. I'm still doing pretty well, but Frank managed to do a massive chew on my gazillion. But what is left?
Well, after I hang out at Nasha Winter's place, then I'm going to spend most of my time in the most advanced neurofeedback machine that I can cultivate and develop, and it's one of my passions. And the reason I'm doing that is because regardless of how we look at the biohacking stuff, it really is to optimize our experience, which is completely subjective. And that subjective experience is tied to consciousness itself. And so being able to separate one's consciousness from your physical body, I think is the most valuable biohack there is, because you can't control all the external conditions of health. But if you can turn your internal state, the level of peace, awareness, and your ability to step outside of time, I think then lets you not be so concerned about its passing.